Okay. Hi, this is Larry Matty. I'm the co-founder of Serum Exchange, and we welcome you to the presentation, Do Your Callers Hate Your IVR? Our presenter today is Joe Alwyn, who's the Vice President and General Manager of AVOKE Analytics, which is a Raytheon BBM technology company. Just a few words in terms of the overall virtual conference. We really appreciate your attendance at the presentations and in the exhibit halls. For the folks who haven't been in the hall, there is a wealth of information in there. A lot of the companies that are participating, the vendor companies, are giving away prizes. So there's some great white papers, column articles, so we urge you to go to the exhibit hall. The hard copy of all the presentations are located in the agenda in a PDF format. The recordings or the links to the recordings will also be in the agenda section for everybody to listen to. And the conference site will keep going for about 2 weeks after tomorrow, so you can still access the exhibit booths and the information in them and also listen to the recordings. And now just a few words about Joe and BBN. BBN is based on 30 years of research and practice as a company. They do a lot of work with the government. They're extremely high-tech in what they do. And as far as AVOKE Analytics is concerned, companies do select them to optimize customer effort, revenue, and cost efficiency. Joe was previously Vice President and General Manager of Call Center Solutions at Empirics and has 25 years of experience turning technology innovation into practical business solutions. We will be doing a Q&A after Joe's presentation. Please send your questions in through the Q&A box on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Please avoid sending them through chat. And we will be sending you a survey after the presentation. We really appreciate your feedback. We love to maintain the high quality of these presentations, so your suggestions, comments are extremely important to us. And now, here's Joe Alwyn. Joe?
Thank you, Larry, and thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm in California today, so all of you out here in the north, thank you for starting your day with us. And those of you on the East Coast, thanks for taking a bit of your lunch hour. And thank you also to Larry Matty and the folks at Serum Exchange do a fantastic job running the conference, and we're very happy to be part of it. So we're going to cover today this idea of what's going on with IVRs and what can we do, how did we get into this situation where consumers have such a distaste and kind of a dislike for IVR. And I'll share with you some data, some recent data about customer perceptions of IVR systems. And I think this is a really challenging time for us because, you really can't live without the IVR. I mean, it's a critical part of the infrastructure to route calls and deliver self-service. And yet, as an industry, it seems that we've really trained people to dislike these systems. So what we're going to basically talk about is, those perceptions that are out there about IVR, and the fact that, since we've been working on IVR systems, the world has not been static. It has changed. The customers that are calling in have changed. The questions they're asking have changed. And our contact centers have responded. And I guess I'm going to posit or set out the hypothesis that it's time for the IVRs to change now as well. And, if the change has happened in call centers, it hasn't really happened in the IVRs, and so we'll talk about some things we can do in that respect. Okay, so what are people encountering with IVRs? Well, by the way, some of these perceptions are well-founded because experiences in IVRs are not great. And so we do a thing called the Customer Effort Index, and this is actual measurements across the industry showing what kind of issues people encounter when they use IVRs. And so, fully a third, practically a third, attempt an unsolicited opt-out. So what does that mean? Well, that's an opt-out that has not been presented to the caller. So we haven't invited them to opt out. We have, we presented them menu choices, and we either don't offer an opt-out or we haven't presented it. But people just, they pound out or zero out anyway, or they yell agent, and they're basically in a point where they're attempting to get out of the application. We also have, a lot of situations where we collect information in the IVR and we don't pass it on to the agent. We have a lot of calls hang up unresolved in the IVR. So this is sort of an interesting piece of information right here because these calls are unresolved. These calls are contained. So if we have a containment metric, we actually think these are successful because they never got to an agent. But nothing ever got done for the caller. So that's not necessarily a good thing. So the point of this is that there's real significant data that describes the kind of experiences people have using IVR systems today. So therefore, it's probably not a big surprise that if you ask customers what they think about IVR systems, you get some pretty negative results. So if we add these two numbers together, that is nearly 70%, two-thirds of consumers say that IVR systems are either unchanged or they've gotten worse over the past decade. That to me is just remarkable. When you think of all the things that we've done in IVR systems over the past decade, we've gone from, really simple touch-tone-oriented menus to environments now where we use speech, we use biometrics in some situations, we're using ANI to match things, we're doing database dips so we can present information and personalize the experience. And yet all of the investments we've made, we've gone through wholesale technology changes from proprietary IVR systems to VXML IVR systems. And the net of that to our customers, to our callers, is that it's gotten no better. In fact, it's gotten worse. So I think this is this to me makes me stop and pause and think about how did this happen, and what should we be doing something different, and if so, what? The other unfortunate fact, I guess now, is that these IVR experiences are easily shared because of social media, because of the nature of the customers. We're going to talk a little bit about boomers versus Gen X and Gen Y. And millennials like to share their experiences. They feel almost an obligation to share their experiences so that others don't suffer the same fate. And so now we've got a situation where, the IVR system as a system that should be a very powerful asset. It should help the customer get to the agent who can really help them. It should help them avoid a queue and get their question answered. So these systems, it should help present a positive brand experience that we want our customers to have when they contact us. So we've got these systems that are supposed to be beneficial, and we've got customers now consciously making decisions to either avoid companies or avoid phone contact because they don't like the IVR. A significant portion taking time to tell the company about the bad IVR experience. This is pretty difficult. So what does this mean, told the company about it? Well, told the company about it probably means that that the customer, the caller, took time with the agent to go on and on about the IVR. So we've got an IVR experience extending talk time. So they feel compelled to talk to the agent about it, which is adding to cost in your contact center. And of course, down here, they're sharing their bad experiences. They're telling other people about it. So not a great situation. So let's talk a little bit about how we got here. And I think there's a couple of things that contribute. One of them certainly is the fact that the people we serve, our customers, our consumers, our callers, are changing, and they want to interact in different ways. So part of it is our audience, our customer base is changing. Part of it is how we sort of manage IVRs and make decisions about design and call flows. But let's start with talking about how customers have changed. So, this is something I think we've all seen, and this is the breakdown of these generations of customers that we have. Certainly most contact centers have spent a lot of time talking about this. Sometimes we talk about boomers versus Gen X versus millennials in terms of managing the workforce, and how do we motivate and retain call center agents that are Gen Y millennials versus call center agents that are Gen X or boomers. So we understand this issue from a workforce perspective, but it also has a very significant impact from a customer perspective. A call reaches us, who's a boomer, has a very different point of view, a very different expectation for service than a caller who is a Gen X or a millennial, Gen Y. And as we can see, the audience is growing in this Gen Y category. So the evolution of these different generations has changed the way customers want to interact with us, and that has in fact changed their expectations for what an IVR system should be like. Well, let's talk more about why that is. Well, one of the most significant differences across these generations is the communication channels they use. And so this is a survey, a simultaneous media survey, and this is a question that's asked. Now, this is not necessarily a breakdown of how people seek service. This is just a breakdown of the kinds of communication channels they like to use. So the question that was posed here was, after searching online, how do you communicate with others about a service, product, or brand? So this is taking somebody who's spent some time on the web, they've found some information, and now what do they do next? What channel do they turn to? And they could be turning to a channel to share information with a family member, with a coworker, or to make a purchase, or to make a call about service. It could be any one of those sorts of interactions. And what's interesting is how the different types of communications are changing. So if we look at, for example, email, landline, and in-person, those three, that's fully 2/3 of how our boomers like to communicate. But it's clearly crashing down in terms of preferred channel choices as we move to the Gen X and to the Gen Y, the millennials. And at the same time, we have these other channels that are taking that communication share from email, landline, and in-person. And what are they? Well, there's certainly mobile phones, and there's certainly social and text. And those are the sort of dominant new forms of communication. Well, so we can understand the implications of this in terms of channels we choose to use for service delivery, but it also has implications on how customers want to use channels like IVR. So let's explore that a little further. How is it that makes a difference? Well, here is a chart that breaks down. Now we're talking specifically about contact center. So the previous chart was really just about channel choices for communications in general. This is specifically about contact methods, and this is taken from the CFI group, a study they just released, and it talks about the channels people use to reach out for service. And you can see the phone dominates the space, but website and email and social, even, and chat are significant. In fact, in this survey in 2012, the 2013 published survey of 2012 data, the non-phone channels for the first time exceeded 30% of interactions. What's even more interesting in this particular study is that if you ask the same question, what channel would you have preferred to use, phone crashes to 50%. So we have nearly 20% of this group who use the phone. Maybe if we drew a slice like this. This section here are people who actually would prefer to use one of these other channels but end up using the phone because they can't get the service they want through these other channels. So what happens? How is it that these other channels impact how people want to use the phone? Well, the answer is over here. There's sort of attributes of interactions in other channels that carry over into the way that customers want to use the IVR. First of all, in these other channels, channels like email, the website, chat, Facebook, I can do this at my convenience, right? I can start the interaction, stop, pause the interaction anytime I want. I have control over the pace and the flow of the interaction. I can go in the direction I want. If I feel that a step is unproductive, I can advance through it quickly. I can choose to stop immediately if it's not going the way I want to, and I can control the time that I invest in the interaction. Essentially, the non-phone channels are teaching people or giving people the experience of control and convenience in the interaction. And so when they come to the IVR then, in some IVR systems, the IVR can seem like a very rigid, sequential, paced environment. You know, I have to listen to that informational message, even though it's not why I called. You know, I've got to wait for all these channel, these menu choices before I can select one. I have to go in the specific prescribed series of steps that the company has programmed into this IVR. So the IVR is, you know, unlike these other channels, feels like it, you know, I have to go down a path, and I don't have that control. And this, I believe, is a significant factor impacting this perception that IVRs have gotten worse or that they have unchanged over a decade. And I think this, you know, this desire for convenience and control is certainly driving customers to non-voice channels, but it's also reflecting on their negative feelings about the IVR when they're forced to call and have to deal with the IVR. In the same survey, the CFI group, they actually tried to map the specific items that are going to drive satisfaction. And they surveyed customers, in this case 2,300 participants in this study, to understand their level of satisfaction with their providers, and then to try to break down the components that drive that overall satisfaction level. And so you can see on the left here items that could drive the satisfaction: process, policy and procedure, rep knowledge, rep demeanor, ease of understanding, all factors that, you know, you could imagine if I got a rep that was not knowledgeable, you know, that might really negatively impact my satisfaction. Well, interestingly enough, in the survey, the number one item that has the largest impact on satisfaction is the contact process. And you know, that's something that's fantastic. And to me, that's really an interesting observation, because it seems to me that we spend in the contact center an inordinate amount of time down here on rep knowledge, rep demeanor, and these things don't move the needle very much. And so if you look around in the call center and say, all right, where do we have somebody who is focused on the process of the interaction? Not scoring agents according to some, you know, form and criteria that we've established for quality scores. I mean, that's all demeanor and knowledge, and not that stuff. The bigger stuff. Why do customers contact us? What does that experience look like from dialing to hang up, through a transfer, through the IVR? You know, who's really looking at the contact process? And I think this is an untapped area for focus. You know, I think in a lot of organizations we could take what we have in place to manage rep quality, and I would suggest that for most companies what we're doing there is more than adequate. You know, and expanding your rep quality program might have diminishing returns given its low impact on satisfaction relative to other factors. And perhaps rather than sort of increasing an investment in traditional QA, we should focus on putting a similar quality effort into other parts of the contact. Put a quality effort behind the IVR, put a quality effort behind end-to-end contact process, and you might see a bigger move in things like satisfaction scores. And again, I think this is all related back to those non-voice channels. People have learned a different process of resolving an issue, of interacting with the company in using these other channels, and they want to see that in all ways that they interact with their providers. Well, what have our call centers, you know, if we think about our, you know, the other part of the call center operation, I presume most of you on the call are part of the IVR team. You know, what have we done in the centers to respond to these changes in customers and the way they want to interact with us? And the answer is quite a bit. You know, we've certainly seen a shift in the center in the kinds of questions we're handling. You know, questions like order status, questions like place order, you know, these are getting smaller. We're seeing a decline in this kind of call type in agent-handled calls because these particular calls are going off to other channels. And what we're seeing left in the agent-assisted calls are complex kinds of questions, like technical support and customer service issues. And so, you know, we're seeing call centers beginning to adapt and make changes, reflecting the fact that questions that are reaching an agent are longer, are more complex, and that certainly impacts our forecast. It may impact our training strategy. It may impact our hiring profile. It may impact how we organize reps into skill groups, reacting to this sort of, the decline of the simple question in terms of the kinds of questions that are reaching agents. And one of the impacts, the other thing that we're seeing in call centers, and this is a constant dialogue in our profession, is what metrics should we be using in the contact center in managing agents. This is a survey done last year. It's the Average Handle Time Benchmarking Survey by Barbara Berg, and she asked in this question, what metrics are you currently using? And no surprise, people use quality scores, they use schedule adherence, and they use handle time. And then she asked the very same group, if you had your choice, if you could change the metrics you want to use, what metrics should you use? And interestingly enough, schedule adherence and handle time went away, and instead people would prefer to start using first call resolution and customer sat scores. Now, we could argue about whether these are in fact interesting, the right metrics. We can even argue whether quality scores belong anymore. But the fact is, the call center is responding. The world is changing, and centers are asking questions about what metrics should be used in order to manage our agent resources. And I guess, my point here is that I don't think we've seen a similar shift in debate and questions and changes in the metrics we're using to manage IVRs. And we'll get back to that. But the point is, in the centers, things are being done to react to this changing environment. Interesting piece of information from that same survey, people that are dropping handle time, why are they dropping handle time? Well, here, I like the second one a lot. So the monitoring, observing calls revealed that issues were not being handled. Why? Because agents were aware that they were coming up against a handle time objective, so it was more important to end the call than it was to answer the question. So you can see these sorts of issues driving questions about metrics. Essentially, what we're seeing in the center is a shift from traditional performance-oriented metrics to outcome-related metrics. And again, it can be a whole conversation about metrics, but this upper-level idea, I think, is an interesting one to carry over to the IVR and ask ourselves, if we were to kind of examine IVR metrics and ask ourselves, which metrics do we have that we would consider to be performance metrics, and what would an outcome metric look like in the IVR, and should we begin to measure IVRs according to outcome metrics rather than performance metrics? I think the answer is certainly yes, and I think that can start to lead us down a path we need to go in terms of advancing the IVR and keeping it as a positive asset in our overall service delivery strategy. All right. Well, I've alluded to some of the ideas now about how IVRs might change, could change, and let's go into that in a little more detail. All right. Before we get into what do we need to do, I think it's always helpful to do a little retrospective. We don't want to sit around and sort of punish ourselves and get all negative about it. But understanding this is 20/20 hindsight, I think it's valuable to kind of look back and say, before we start thinking about what we're going to do differently, can we put a finger on what might have contributed to this situation? Where we've got this vital, potentially very powerful technology to help us run our call center operations, and we've essentially taught all of our customers to hate IVRs. What are we going to do? And how did we get here? Well, I think part of the problem is this idea that if you're a hammer, everything looks like a nail. I think we have historically a situation where, vendors have sort of encouraged us to look at the next technology as sort of the magic solution, right? The key is to get rid of DTMF. DTMF is old, it's archaic, people don't want to punch buttons, everything will be better if we go speech. Actually, natural language speech. So I think we've sort of had this idea that speech would sort of fix everything. And in our customers, we've done a few, speech rescues, situations where companies did a wholesale adoption of speech, and all the metrics went bad, and satisfaction went down and self-service went down, and they got their speech IVR, and they were, focused on getting a speech IVR. And, here's an example where the metric, if you will, was technology-based. It was let's get speech. It wasn't outcome-based. They weren't doing speech because they, were determined that they needed to get better outcomes. They were doing speech because they do speech with sort of a, hope and prayer that things would get better. Similarly, I think we have to, I think we're all sort of aware of this, but it's helpful to revisit it. The IVR industry, the vendors of software, IVR software, people who do design for us, people who program and code IVRs, who host IVRs, there's always a vendor bias, right? The vendor bias is to sell you more. And I think that to some degree we've allowed ourselves to build more, to overbuild, to build more IVR than the business would justify. To deploy more technology than you could firmly tie to an improvement in satisfaction, improvement in outcome metrics like routing accuracy or self-service. So I think that's the first issue. I think the second issue is this idea that we probably rely on our own teams a little too much, and the issue there is that we are all way too close to our own businesses to look at the thing objectively. We're cursed because we know the business, and we grew up with the system, and we've grown accustomed to the way the process works. Or maybe you personally did the IVR design, and so you're invested in it. You're too close to it to really be objective. And so I think there are opportunities to make sure that from time to time we get outside and we get some external visibility, some external point of view. And I don't mean necessarily just to go get a consultant. I think, get to the customers, because even the consultants have had sort of, fads and fashions we've gone through in IVRs. Think about for a while all of the ideas that were out there about personality and, making IVRs chatty and maybe having two different voices in the IVR. So there's like three of us on the call. There's some really crazy stuff that has been sort of promoted within the industry again. And I think sometimes we just have to get out and really see what customers are thinking. And then I think the other issue is that honestly we've just had limited ability to really see what's happening in the IVR. Generally application logs are not a great source of information to understand customer behavior, customer intent, customer satisfaction. They tell us about the health of the application. They tell us if the application is behaving as we designed it to. They don't tell us whether it's working for customers. They tell us the customer was here and then there and then at this menu, but they don't tell us whether they were struggling at each of those points. So, we traditionally haven't had visibility of calls after they leave the IVR. And we'll see in a moment that, in fact, the most valuable information about the IVR is not in the IVR, it's later. And yet, following calls after they leave the IVR in many environments is extremely difficult, not to mention, the idea that wouldn't it be wonderful if we could actually replay audio and observe customers interacting with the IVR in a manner similar to the way that our call center quality teams observe actual interaction. We don't rely on agent notes in the CRM system to evaluate the call. We listen to the call. And similarly, we really shouldn't rely on application logs to understand what's happening in the IVR. We need to listen to some calls. And yet that is very difficult because in many environments we don't necessarily have a recording capability operating in the IVR. So, these are some of the factors that I think have contributed. So what do we need to do then? Let's get to action. I think it's time to really stop and re-examine the strategy, the business purpose, the things we're trying to accomplish with the IVR. And, I've gotten some pictures and words here to illustrate the extremes. But, honestly, even if you look at the metrics we've used, the metrics we've used are containment and deflection. It's almost like, please keep the customers away. It's just, that's our goal, is to keep the customers away from the agents. For goodness sakes, don't let them out. I mean, it's just not a very service-oriented way to think about the IVR. And, so we have terrible situations where people think they're winning on their containment metric. And you've got customers hanging up unresolved in the IVR, unhappy, frustrated. So the customer's like, I can't get my answer, and I can't get out of this IVR, and they hang up the phone. And over in the other office, we're cheering because we have a contained call. So, I mean, containment is just certainly an outdated metric. We've also, sometimes we hear people talk about IVR as a channel. I'm gonna posit or suggest that is really outdated, and we've got to change that view and start talking about the IVR differently. The whole purpose of the IVR was not service the customer; it was reduce agent volume. So, I think we have to change the dialogue around the IVR and change the sort of high-level strategy and framework around the IVR, and then let that permeate down and drive what we think about in terms of call paths, features, functionalities, and the experience. And I think the new approach is to say, look, we are about not just reducing call volume, but also reducing time. I mean, we can in the IVR do things such that when the call does get to the agent can handle the call with a shorter talk time. And in the past we've sort of really focused on keeping the call away from the agent at all. And I think we have to expand this a little bit and think about the IVR not just as a deflection tool, but a tool that actually assists the agent by doing some work for the agent, enabling the agent to move forward in a more significant way when the call reaches their desk. I also think we have to start thinking about the IVR as a piece of an integrated voice channel. I think certainly if you ask the customer would not say there's an IVR channel and there's an offshore channel and there's a business partner channel and there's an internal channel. The customer would say there's a telephone channel. And so I think we have to start thinking about a voice channel as an integrated effort that consists of the IVR, our internal centers, our outsourced centers. They're all part of one channel, which is the voice channel. And I think we have to start looking at how do we design and use IVRs to give customers this idea of choice and control and to really help reduce effort, to make the customer really experience that the IVR has saved them time. It's made the interaction easier. It's made the interaction better. So I think these are sort of the attributes, this picture on the right. Let's not think about keeping the customer in that IVR jail. Let's think about really being a service delivery and a tool and a tool that actually is there to help the agent in the interaction, not necessarily just to keep interactions away from the agent. So let's talk about this idea of one channel. I think this is really critical. In a lot of centers, this one telephone call. So here's this woman, going through a range of emotions. Looks like impatience with the IVR, bored and queue. I guess she liked the first agent, and then a little frustrated with the second agent. So that's the life of an experience. And I think if we look at the way we run many contact center operations, we almost view this as three channels. We have somebody managing that, we have somebody managing tier 1, and we have somebody managing tier 2, and nobody's managing this as an end-to-end experience. We're managing this as three silos. And that, I think, contributes to part of where we are, not just with IVR perceptions, but with perceptions of customer service in general. And in particular, the IVR, in fact, is not a channel by itself. I mean, there are things we do in the IVR that impact this entire downstream experience, right? We may think, if we look at the application logs in the IVR, we may think that we did exactly the right thing and gave the caller to the right skill group, and yet if we follow the call later on, it could be this first agent says, I'm sorry, I'm the wrong agent, I have to transfer you. So here, downstream, we've learned that a call that looks perfect in the application logs, in fact, was misrouted by the IVR. So all of this downstream information is really critical, and I think we've got to start establishing a team, a process, a methodology, get some tools so that we can manage this as one contact process. We can start managing this the way customers experience it, a single phone call. This is not 3 phone calls. one phone call in the switch belonging to the first tier group, another phone call in the switch belonging to the second tier group, skill group, and another phone call, in the IVR. It's not 3 calls, it's 1 call. And I think the sooner we start managing contact processes that way, we're on the way to making things better. As I mentioned earlier, downstream is where the truth about your IVR really lives. It's in observing this interaction with this first agent or the second agent that we might discover that the question was a question for which we have a self-service application. Again, the application log might look like the caller made natural choices and got out and everything's fine, and then we discover later on that they wanted a balance. And we're like, well, wait a minute, balance is in the IVR. The application log was perfect, but down here I discover that this call should have stayed in the IVR and should have used balance. So we discover the first agent saying I'm the wrong agent. So the truth is actually down here, because down here in the first conversation, the first agent and the second agent is where we get a more complete picture of the customer's intent. In their dialogue with the first and second agent, we learn what was in their head as they were going through the IVR. And that is invaluable to help us understand why they behave and respond to menus the way they do, because now we have a more complete sort of picture of the mental model of the caller. We gain that downstream in the agent conversations, and with that knowledge, we can then go back and have a better understanding of why customers make the choices that they do in the IVR. So that's another crucial direction. And here we go. This is just the point I was talking about. Context and intent is revealed throughout the call. We learn that here, we learn that everywhere. A lot of times we learn that in the queue. Customers say things while they're in queue that give us insights into what they're thinking. And so all of this information down here is really valuable to help us go back here then and design a better IVR experience. And so this is really critical. And of course, in many environments, this is really hard to do, because we transfer calls from the IVR to another location. And following the call through those transfers can be very tricky. And then we transfer again from the first agent to the second agent. And again, following those calls can be extremely difficult. We may be, this call may traverse 3 different companies. We may have the IVR outsourced with one company, and then Tier 1 is another company with a center in the Philippines, and then Tier 2 is a center we operate here in the U.S. So I understand the difficulty, but the point is, I think this is vital that we do this, that we get, we find a way to observe the interaction from dial to hang up and get a more complete understanding of the contact process. Remember, contact process was the #1 impact of satisfaction, #1 driver of satisfaction. Good news is there are systems today that help us overcome these obstacles of these transfers, that actually follow calls, dialing to hang up no matter where you send them. So there are, and we're going to talk a little bit about that in a moment. So let's get more specific. I've been talking at a high level about ways to think about the IVR differently, and we actually have a few ideas, new rules. Those of you that like Bill Maher, he didn't actually do new rules for IVR. I think it'd be fun if he did, but I thought this was just a fun graphic to attach here. So some specific things we think everybody should be considering. So, by the way, I should mention that we offer these from the perspective of having worked with 40 or 50 companies and seeing what's going on. Companies of all sizes. Typically, actually, we work with folks that have, 1 million plus calls a year, kind of at the low end, all the way up to 50 million calls a year. And so, we've seen it all. We've seen touch tone, directed dialogue, call natural language, hosted, on-prem, all kinds of authentication strategies, hidden opt-outs, no opt-outs, advertised opt-outs. So we've seen this movie many, many times and offer these based on our experience. First of all, I think it's time, and this may seem like a dramatic statement, I think it's time to consider this rule. I think if you cannot pass information to agents, don't collect it in the IVR. I mean, we feel that strongly about the importance of making the IVR helpful to the agent. And it also hitting, beating down one of the top dissatisfiers that customers have, which is they have to present the same information multiple times in the call. It's time to do something about that. It's time to remove that dissatisfier, collect the information once from the customer, and use it throughout the call. It's time to make work the IVR does to collect information, let that benefit the agent. If the IVR is going to collect information, it should get credit for that, and that information should be passed on to the agent such that the agent can spend less talk time servicing the call and can have a better experience with the customer because they don't start off by asking the customer to repeat everything. So, I think this is a significant point, and there are plenty of systems that collect information in the IVR to make a routing decision, and then throw all the information away, route the call, and ask the customer to start over again. So, next, mobile. With mobile, Annie's really mean something. We're not talking about a home number with somebody dialing from that home number, being one of 6 people. Mobile is 1-to-1, and so that means Annie matching should be adopted and should have more consideration now because of the growth of mobile. And there's some really interesting solutions today, new solutions available to handle the problem of keeping a database current. That's really the big issue with Annie is keeping a current database of mobile numbers associated with customers, but there are new third-party services that can really help with that. Start taking credit in the IVR for partial self-service. So this idea that we can reduce handle time, and that's just as valuable, maybe more valuable than reducing volume. If we can save a few seconds off every call, that might be more valuable than deflecting 5% of the call volume. So really pursuing this idea of partial and full self-service. 4, drive everything from customer behavior and customer experience. And that has to be the primary drivers of everything we do. Forget about, this idea that we must go speech. We found some consultant that has a philosophy about buoy that we like, time to consider biometrics. Forget all of that. And drive first from behavior and experience. And really outcome metrics. And then all of these things are in service of trying to achieve the right customer behavior, trying to achieve the right customer experience, and trying to achieve outcome-related metrics. And for outcome-related metrics, I think we have to go back to the whole reason for an IVR. We have an IVR to route. We have an IVR to do self-service, but again, I've added this idea of partial self-service, right? And so those are outcome metrics. And then, importantly, we need to look at effort and make sure that we're not putting customers through inordinate amounts of effort in providing the IVR. And then finally, new strategies. Let's start working on ways that we can understand the call from start to finish. So we need information not just inside the IVR, but also nonstop all the way out to the end of the call. All right, so those are the new rules. And in order to do this, let me just put in a couple words about what we do. Fundamentally, we have an analytic system that solves this problem of getting audio inside the IVR and following calls from start to finish. And we do this without requiring any impact on the system. There's no integration, there's no new software. In fact, all of your systems just run the way they do. No new hardware, nothing at all in any of your systems. And that's because our analytics solution is in the cloud. It's actually in the phone network. And so you essentially configure your routing scheme such that our system can listen in on calls. And since we're listening in on the network, we follow the calls from end to end. And then we can do amazing things. We can categorize the calls, which means that you can quickly go to interesting calls. You don't waste time pouring through calls trying to find things. You jump right to things that are interesting. We now have real customer behavior that we can observe, not just test calls from people that know the system too well. And so you get a lot of benefit here. And the way we do this is we actually analyze audio. For the more technical folks on the audience, how in the world do we do analytics without any application data? Well, the answer is we record the call in the cloud, in the phone network, and then we analyze the audio. We actually, by analyzing the audio, we can actually generate IVR events. So we don't need application logs from the IVR because we can recognize those events in the audio. We also create a completely searchable transcript of the call. So now we have a really powerful set of information. We can use that information to categorize, and we can provide text mining capabilities. We can find patterns. We can break calls down into segments and analyze transfers. So we can do all kinds of things just with the data we extract from the audio, and that's how we do it without requiring any of the complex sort of technology integration that you see in other solutions. Bottom line, what do you get from this? Well, this approach really has benefits, and we can get into more about that another time. I want to make sure we have some time for questions, but when you look at calls from end to end, what you end up with is a deeper root cause understanding of what's going on, and by listening to how the agent handles things, you can discover from the agent process how to go modify the IVR flow. That's exactly what happened here. By following calls through to the agents, we learned hints from the agents about how to make a better IVR flow and had significant improvement, in this case, in how the IVR works for the center and for customers. Again, another example, here's a classic problem. Without following calls through to the end, we really can't understand misroutes and transfers. And in this case, taking this end-to-end view allowed this organization to reduce misroutes and transfers caused by the IVR. We cut those in half. So there's very significant advantages from this approach. We'd love to engage with any of you who might want to explore it. So here's sort of all our contact information, including mine, if you have questions or would like to reach out to us. I'll tell you what I'd like to do now, though, is that I would like to take some questions. And Larry, maybe we have some time now for some Q&A.
Thank you, Joe, and thank you for the very, very fine presentation. That was excellent. We have several questions regarding copies of the slides or PDFs. They are located in the agenda section of the virtual conference, www.crmevents.com. Go to the agenda, and you'll have to sign in, and you'll get copies of all the presentations. Anyway, let's get started, and please use, as we mentioned in the chat area, please use the Q&A box on the right-hand side of your screen to send us your questions. The first question we have, Joe, is our company is creating a new IVR. I suggest that we make it funny versus flat. Sort of the Southwest Airlines approach to IVR. Has this been done? Any success?
That's a great idea. We haven't seen any of that yet. We haven't seen an example of anybody trying to put a little humor in the IVR. I think it's not a bad idea. So the issue really is how you're using time, and what we're seeing is that customers are very in tune with whether you're wasting their time. Whether you're wasting their time with information readouts that they didn't ask for and that are not relevant to their specific question, whether you're wasting their time with branding messages that marketing has asked you to put in there, whether you're, everybody knows there's a website. Don't waste my time with a message that says I could go to your website. So I think that's the key issue, is that if you're going to do something, try to make sure you're aware of time. I think the other thing that we have found is that this idea to really make the IVR human and to enable a dialogue with the IVR that would be like talking to a person, it really is not effective. What we find is that folks don't want to be tricked into thinking they're talking to a human only to find out it's a machine. What folks want is an interaction with a machine that they recognize as being a machine, but that they can have that interaction in an effective way and move on. So I would be a little careful about how you inject humor in and kind of how far you go to sort of turn the IVR into a person, if you will. Of course, if you're going to put humor in, I would hope that it needs to be aligned with your culture. I think if you have a very sort of formal culture, but the IVR has some humor in it, it may not work. Whereas if you're Southwest Airlines, people know that there's that humor element associated with the brand, and so seeing it in the IVR would make sense. Don't think the IVR is a place to change the brand and insert some fun if that's not part of your overall brand. Just some ideas along those lines.
Okay, would you suggest having one voice on all IVR apps or call flows?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's much more understandable for the customer if there's a single voice and they know that they're in the system. If you change voices, you sort of reveal the fact that there's multiple systems to the customer, and that is not a positive experience. It kind of being transferred from machine to machine. A change in voice can miscue the customer to think they're actually talking to a human now, depending on how you've written the prompts. So, one voice throughout the IVR is certainly the way to go.
The voice of the IVR used to confirm male or female? Any thoughts on that?
I think there has been research done on that, and I don't have that at my fingertips. We certainly see both in the industry. Again, I think it gets back to brand. I think that's a choice that can be associated with the personality of the brand that your company has. But we've certainly seen effective IVRs using both male and female voice talent. Clearly, the flow and the interaction and the dialogue is far more important than whether you've chosen a male or female voice.
We do have a response from one of the attendees who said, yes, there has been research. Male is heard much better, especially with older callers.
Very good. Thank you for that.
I'm sure my daughters would love that. Okay. How big a sample of calls are needed to get an AVOKE analytics software?
That's great. Good question. So, the answer is depends on your business problem and what you're trying to learn. The AVOKE system is it's a bunch of ports in the phone network, and so you can put 100% of your call volume through it. You can put 1%. You can put 5%. And as with anything statistics related, we generally work with our customers and say, what are you trying to accomplish? And therefore, do you need 100%? Can you get by with a sampling strategy? We're huge fans of sampling. We think sampling can save money and can enable you to get answers to your questions much faster by sampling. A properly constructed sample gives you a very accurate picture of what's happening in your contact center. And, if you can take 1% of your call volume and learn what you need to learn, why take 100%? Why spend so much more to do 100% to get the same answer? So, generally, we work with our customers to figure out what problem you're trying to solve, how quickly do you want to see changes in the data, and then, that leads to some sort of a sampling strategy.
Okay. Next question. How many FTEs does it take to do justice to good analytics studies? How many FTEs does it take? And in parentheses, we have if you handle 5 million calls.
Yeah. Well, it's actually a low number. So the number of FTEs it takes, we have customers that go either from a 0.5, somebody who works maybe 2 days a week on this, or the equivalent of 16 hours a week, and we have other customers that have 3 or 4 people. So that tends to be the range. There are certainly some organizations that have a dozen, large organizations with complex product lines and complex kinds of inquiries. But generally, this analytics is a small group of people that are process-oriented, that have a little bit of detective in their nature, and they use tools like our analytics system to support their work. So the other option we provide, and I think many companies do now, is you can either staff this internally, and we can help you scale a group, train a group, establish a methodology. Alternatively, we can provide that for you. I mean, we are a technology provider. We have the analytics solution, but we also do provide, staff augmentation, if you will, or outsourced resources. So we can actually be both your technology provider and your analytics group, if that's the way you want to go. You can even do a transition. You can start out with us, and then transition us away as you build a team. So, but this is not a huge labor effort.
Okay. If you don't use call logs, how can you categorize opt-outs correctly if you don't know if the dialogue state has a low max error count versus an explicit business rule driving the opt-out?
Well, that's a great point. And so many times what's happening in an opt-out or it could be an error route or some sort of default route. A lot of times that's evident from the sequence of prompts that are played to the caller, combined with the caller's interactions. So we can of course recognize the request for information or the prompt played immediately prior to the customer's opt-out attempt. We can see, of course, whether they opted out with DTMF or with speech. We can see whether there were prior errors in the interaction, which will help us figure out maybe it's hitting a global error counter. And then typically after an opt-out, there is some sort of a message played to the caller that says, okay, before I send you to the agent, let me try one more time. Or maybe there'll be another message that says something else. And these different prompts may occur based on the reason for the opt-out, so that can provide a clue. So there are, there's certain categorization we can do by analyzing the dialogue, but then we get to a situation where we say, look, there's a large amount of opt-outs here, and we've reached the limit of what can be understood by observing the call. And so now we can direct teams to say, let's go into your application log for this particular set of interactions and understand it in more detail. So our system ends up being the thing that surveys the entire call, finds the hotspots, finds the problem areas, goes quite far in categorizing them, but then in the course of getting to root cause understanding of a specific issue, it's not uncommon then to say, all right, let's supplement what we know from the AVOKE system with some information from the underlying application logs.
Next question. When incorporating an IVR, what is the minimum expected percentage of calls transferred to the IVR?
I'm sorry, repeat that one for me again, Larry.
Sure. When incorporating an IVR, what is the minimum expected percentage of calls transferred to the IVR?
Transferred to the IVR. So to add an IVR, what percentage of your call volume should you put through it? Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, I think so. I believe so.
So that, I don't know that one can sort of use that approach to justify adding an IVR to your environment. It sounds like maybe you're considering an IVR for a specific transaction as opposed to an initial greeting. Most commonly, we see the IVR being the first thing that every call hits. So 100% of the volume hits the IVR, and the IVR is used then to get the caller to the right skill or get the caller to a self-service application and then actually conduct the self-service application. So there's a routing function followed by a service function. Generally what we do to help customers establish an ROI for an IVR system is we characterize the call volume by call reason. How many different call reasons are there? How many skill groups are there that we need to disaggregate calls into? And of those transaction types, what percentage of those do we think could be handled in an automated system from, of course, our knowledge of IVR systems? And are there opportunities to do partial self-service? And then you can put all of that through some math with your average talk time, and you can come out with, the IVR will save this amount of talk time on an annual basis. And now you've got a basis upon which to consider the investment of putting an IVR system in. So I guess we take a slightly, it's not necessarily percent of volume, we take a slightly different way of looking at it. It's really, it's almost what percent of service can be delivered by the IVR, both in a routing function and in a partial or full self-service capability.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Can analytics be used for agent scorecards focused on service delivery?
Can analytics be for agent scorecards? I think there's mixed results on that. We certainly have seen analytics being promoted as a tool to assist traditional agent QA in terms of scoring agents. I think there's been some use of it. I don't know that we've seen widespread adoption. There's sort of two ways you might use analytics in an agent QA environment. One would be to select the calls for your QA analyst to observe. So rather than doing a random selection of 4 calls per agent per month, using a more targeted way to pick calls, maybe pick calls that are that have customers expressing frustration and observe those. So that gets to the core of the methodology, because then you've got agents saying, well, wait a minute, you're not really evaluating me fairly. You're picking my worst calls, and then you're evaluating me on my worst calls. So I think there are opportunities, though, to use analytics to maybe make a more targeted selection of calls for observation. Again, that might have to complement the traditional random sample just to maintain some equity in the way you're evaluating agent performance. The other way that analytics can be used is to actually have the analytics try to score some attributes of the call, and I think there's been some limited success with that.
Joe, thank you very, very much. That was a very, very fine presentation, and it was a great Q&A. I'd like to thank everybody for attending the session. If we haven't gotten to your questions, Joe will answer them offline. If you have additional questions, you see his contact information on your screen right now. Again, I'd like to thank everybody. The recordings of the presentations will be in the agenda section of the virtual conference site, so please go there, and we urge you to visit the exhibit halls where there's a wealth of information and some great prizes. Thank you, everybody, and thank you, Joe.